Welcome back, dear friends, to the highlights of the book Action Reaction. Today, Kirsten and I will be covering chapter 7 with all of you. It's a beautiful chapter. We can't reiterate, we can't say too much, that it's a beautiful chapter, and it serves certainly as a foundation to what's to come in this book. Also give some explanation to some of the highlights that we have of some of the cases that we have studied before with Druzo and all. But in this chapter, which is so rich, it has so much information that we do again emphasize, read it and reread it, and it's just, you know, an invitation to all of us to learn so much. Even less, let's say if we get to chapter 20 and we have some questions, come back here because this is the foundation for. But here we see several things. Here, you know, Andre Luiz and Hilario, and they ask several questions to Minister Sanzio, in which he talks about good and evil. He talks about action and reaction again through these questions, determinism, and you know, it's several things. But because of time, we're not going to cover everything, but there are some highlights that we'd like to go in depth with. And the first one, which is very beautiful, it's talking about what? Pain. Tell us, Kirsten, what does Sanzio, when he gets to be asked about pain, what does he say?
It's very interesting. What he says is that through all of his experiences in the lower zones, we could say in the depths and the abysses of different hells for people, he noticed that nobody was ever left alone. And Leo, it's such an interesting concept because as we were studying for this, we were having discussions amongst ourselves. It's very poetic. And as you mentioned, up until now, all these chapters basically have been building a foundation for what's to come for the rest of the book. In this particular chapter, and it's chapter 7, which is so interesting because 7 marks the beginning or an end of a cycle, right? So it's like a pivotal cycle because Minister Sanzio, when he talks about pain, it's interesting. Why does he bring that highlight? Of all the highlights, he could say many things. Why does he say, you're never left alone? And just through our own inspirations, we feel that because in life, when we endure pain, oftentimes the majority of people will say they feel alone in their pain. You know, when Jesus said, pick up your cross and follow me, it's profound. It has a lot of meaning that we could extract from. And one of the things we wanted to extract that sentence of Jesus is that when we endure pain, it is our own. And we do have that sensation of feeling alone because it's part of that process. But Minister Sanzio comes and gives us something so comforting, that as you begin this process of redemption, pick up your cross, but know you were never alone and you're never left without help.
Most certainly, most certainly. And it's beautiful because here we go back to some of the teachings that we receive from Spiritism as well. When we go to chapter, the third part of the Spirit's book, the chapter that discusses the law of love and justice, right? And he sets the tone over here that perhaps whatever we will see and whatever we have saw, right, love becomes, you know, the foundation of everything. He could actually, you know, bring and say, oh, suffering is this, suffering is that, but he says there's a lot of suffering, but we're never alone by God. We're never left alone by God. And it's a beautiful thing that whatever happens in our lives as well, because we always like to bring this to our daily lives. Love is the foundation of everything. Nobody lives without love. We always try to be part of something. We always want to be part of something, be something, and that needs love. Well, obviously, we'll see justice being applied. God's justice, not human justice that is quite different, but we'll see love before everything. But then he goes on. He goes on by talking about this accounting system.
It's amazing.
It's an amazing thing. And I'll take your words here. These high officers of God giving us, loaning us the beauty of life in general. Tell us a little bit more about it.
Leo, when we read this and we discussed this again, it made us really think about a bank. There are spiritual loan officers, if we could put it in that perspective. Specifically, Minister Sanzio refers to them as angelic genii. And he refers to saying that there are spirits who are in charge of giving postponements, giving merits. You know, we hear about noble people like Givaldo Franco. We've heard many stories that he was giving a meritorium. And it's interesting for us to think about, because we think about, you know, who's in charge of giving that? Because Minister Sanzio says, if here on earth we have bankers, we have accountants for huge corporations, why wouldn't God have the same? And it's almost as if it's an aha moment, like, duh,
yes.
Of course God would have a perfect accounting system where high spirits give account for every little thing that we do and give merits, which is nice, Leo, because it's nice for us because we know that, okay, there are some spiritual loan officers, we are given some help, right?
So what happens, and since we took that approach, what happens when we get a loan from a bank, when we loan some money, when we get something? What do we have to do? We have to pay it back. Mm-hmm. And we have to usually pay it back with what? With interest. Mm-hmm. What is the highlight here? That yes, we receive all these beautiful things from God, from life in general, right? And what is Sanzio asking us to do with this reminder? To pay it back. How do we pay it back? Are we going to go and say, okay, now I have to pay God, let me take some money to him? No, multiply it.
Exactly.
Multiply what we receive. Multiply what is inside of somebody else. Perhaps someone is in need of that assurance that, okay, no, you can do that. That's multiplying the resource that a person has inside of her. So, you know, it's a beautiful thing and it connects to the goodness that we're going to talk about later.
Right.
But it's just a beautiful thing to multiply it. Pay it back, but pay it back with love, with kindness, helping others. And that's a huge reassurance to ourselves that, again, we have to be charitable.
It's the parable of the talents, right? Whatever's given to you. Because really, and it's another highlight in this book, that nothing that we get belongs to us.
Nothing at all.
Nothing.
Nothing at
Everything from like the microscopic amoeba to the vast galaxies to our physical bodies. We were having a discussion, Leo, about when we die, should our families be able to donate our organs? Guess what? They don't belong to us anyway. So you might as well let somebody else use them. And it's the ultimate form of giving, in a sense, even though technically you're giving something that doesn't belong to you. We should prepare ourselves. It's another sidebar, interesting thing for us to talk about, right?
Right, and it's it comes with responsibility.
Responsibility.
It comes with
Thank you.
what
yes.
Sanzio also did. I'm calling him Sanzio already. Look at this. But Minister Sanzio talk about the discernment, talk about the responsibility that we have to have with all of these things. That as we grow, morally speaking, as we evolve, then also our responsibility grows towards what we receive in life. So it's an amazing concept, because sometimes we take things for granted, and we're not responsible. We think that everything that we receive, you know, and it's beautiful because nobody knocks on our door and say, "Oh, now you have to pay for the air that you received today."
Exactly.
Nobody knocks on the door and say, "Now you have to pay for the sunshine that you received today." Mm-hmm. It's life in general that God gives us, and just a beautiful thing that, you know, talking about Divaldo. Then one day, Joana de Angeli, I can't remember. He's actually in Mexico, and Joana de Angeli invites him to look at city of Mexico, if I'm not mistaken, and say, "My son, this is all yours." And he's like, "Mine?" And she's like, "Yeah, this is all yours." And he's amazed. And yes, God gives the universe to us, waiting for us to flourish, you know, the natural laws that are inside of us, with discernment, with this courage.
Responsibility.
And responsibility.
And you mentioned that, Leo, and I wanted to bring it as one of our highlights, that a little bit of a discernment equals great responsibility, right? And it's interesting because we are given much, but you said as much as we are given, more we are responsible. That's really interesting. It's good for us to remember that, even though it's simplistic in nature, right?
It is very simplistic. But one of the other highlights that we would like to bring in this book, I think this also touches our heart, because he says in a very nice way, and I would like to quote it from the book just to make sure that we have the right words here.
Page 86.
He talks about good and evil on page 86 after he's asked, and he says, "The good, my friend, is progress and happiness, safety and justice for all human beings, and for all the creatures we meet on the world." And he goes on to tell more, but it's such a beautiful, poetic in a way, but it's such a beautiful reminder to all of us that this beauty, all of these things, this happening, it's not just for me, but it's for everyone, all the creatures on earth, the animals, the plants, everything that is created by God, that wasn't created by us. It's also, you know, very easy to discern what I created, what God created, but how we react with these things, how we deal with these things, how we deal with this beautiful universe, that is given to us. And again, reminding us that evil is everything that is against that.
Right.
You know, anyone who has an egotistic idea that if whatever I have is only for me, then we need to go ahead and rethink, and we need to invite that person in another way to think about life in general.
Exactly. And I think that passage is beautiful because it reminds us that idea for us to ask ourselves, if what I am doing is truly working towards the goodness and the benefit of all, or is it just for myself? Because that's what he says evil is. Evil is when you keep goodness just for yourself.
For yourself.
And it's interesting, Leo, because when we, just as an example, not to judge one another at all, because this is not the purpose of our study, but we notice sometimes there are people who have great relationships with their family, loving relationships, but yet they don't share that with others. They keep it all to themselves. And it's interesting because when we read and study about reincarnation, we learn that we need to be other people's friends. We need to branch out, because in our next reincarnation, we need to find our friends in the physical realm. Joanna Diane just talks about that as well.
Universal family.
Universal family.
Oh, sure.
Learn to work in society with people. It's important.
Right.
Really
That is very important. And when we talk about family, we have to extrapolate a little bit and go beyond the boundaries of the
blood
house,
ties, exactly.
of the blood ties, because you can be my sister in the next reincarnation. We could have a much higher relationship, even if we don't have the blood ties.
Right.
If we now work on that path, if we now work on that idea, our enemies, if we go ahead and make amends with our enemies, perhaps one day it will change to a much closer position, hopefully.
Right.
But there is a very also interesting passage of this book that kind of a revelation to all of us. That reflects circumstances. Tell us a little bit about it.
Dear friends, we're going to recommend that you go and read this particular chapter of the book. It is quite profound, to say the least. It's on page 90, and they call it Reflex Circumstance. What it is this, and they touch on this as part of the law of cause and effect. They give an example. A 40-year-old man commits suicide. He dies, goes to the spirit realm, and he suffers all the consequences of that. In his next reincarnation, the way that the law of cause and effects work, and the way that this reflex circumstances pops up, is that in his next life, when he reaches the age of 40, he will encounter similar circumstances that's going to bring about that deep emotion, that he's going to be tempted to commit suicide at that exact age again. So we think about age and the relevance and cycles, everything is perfect. When it comes to God, everything is divinely set out. But there is one last highlight I would say we would like to bring, is that even though this reflex circumstances happens, it's part of this law of cause and effect, but there is a consoling aspect. We learn that Minister Sanzio says this to us, that you can prepare yourself. Depending upon your level of evolution, spirits can prepare themselves in the spirit realm, but if not, during childhood and adolescence, we can build up these spiritual and moral treasures. That's why when we become a parent or an educator, or we are even in contact with children, we should try our best to gear them towards morality, towards a conversation with God, to help them on this pathway, because we don't know who our children are. Unless you're an extensive medium, we don't know who our children are. So we should already come with this perspective. But also in chapter 14 of the Gospel according to Spiritism, St. Augustine lets us and consoles our hearts and lets us know that not to put all the blame on the parents, that we can educate our children, give them the best that we can, but ultimately it is up to us and our strong will, our free will, to decide what we want to do with our lives. So this would be our last and final highlight for you. We encourage you to educate yourself, that it's never too late to begin your study, to begin again and starting anew with faith and with love. We wish you many blessings.
Thank you.